The year was 1808, and in the hamlet of Blackthorn Hollow, tucked deep in the moors of Yorkshire, the people lived as they always had, by the mercy of the hearth and the terror of the dark. No gas lamps, no lucifer matches, no clocks by the church bell and the cock's crow. They rose at 4 in the morning when the frost still clung to the inside of the window panes like white lace. Eliescaro, broad-shouldered and hollow-cheeked, would strike flint against steel until a spark caught the tinder, then nurse the single rushlight into a flame no bigger than a man's thumb. His wife, Martha, boiled thin oat porridge in the same iron pot they had used since their wedding day, the water drawn the night before from the well that sometimes tasted of iron and old bones. The children, 9-year-old Joseph and 6-year-old little Meg, helped without complaint. Joseph carried the slop bucket to the pigs. Meg carded wool by the fire until her fingers bled. There were no sweets, no toys save a carved wooden horse, missing one ear. When the sun dropped behind the black ridge of the moor, the family gathered close to the hearth, because beyond its circle of trembling light lay a darkness so complete it seemed to breathe. Candles were hoarded like gold, one tallow stub per evening, guttering and stinking of mutton fat. When it died, they sat in blackness and told stories to keep the silence at bay. Stories of the old hag who walked the gibbet road, of the miner who drowned in the flooded shaft and still tapped on cottage walls at midnight, begging for air. That winter, the knocking began. It started softly on the night of the first hard frost. 3 measured raps at the heavy oak door, as though a neighbor had come for a coal from the fire. Elias rose, pitchfork in hand. Who goes? No answer. He unbarred the door anyway because, in 1808, a man did not turn away the desperate. The wind howled in, carrying sleet like needles, but the threshold was empty. Only the moor stretching away under a moonless sky, and the distant sound of the churchyard gate creaking though no one had touched it. The next night, the raps came again, louder. Then a voice, small and wet, like a child with croup. "Papa, it's so cold. Let me in." Joseph's face went the color of whey. Their eldest, Samuel, had died of the spotted fever 3 winters earlier, and lay beneath a crooked slate in the churchyard. The voice was his exactly same lisp, same pleading note. Martha clutched Meg so tightly the child whimpered. "Do not open it, Elias. For the love of God." They prayed the Lord's Prayer until their throats were raw. The voice outside kept calling, growing hoarse, then angry, then joined by others. Widow Pratt, who had starved last spring, old Tom the shepherd, taken by the coughing sickness, even the blacksmith's wife, who had bled to death in childbed. All of them polite at first, all of them asking only for warmth, for light, for a place by the fire. By the 3rd week, the entire village heard the knocking. No one slept. They sat through the long nights in total darkness to save the candles, eyes wide, listening to the dead shuffle from door to door. Sometimes the voices mimicked the living mothers calling their own children by name, husbands begging wives to open just a crack. "Love, I've brought you a rabbit for the pot." The parson preached that it was the work of Bonaparte's spies or the devil's mischief in wartime. But the parson's own wife was found at dawn sitting on her husband's grave, rocking an invisible baby and humming a lullaby from 1788. Then the dead stopped asking. They simply entered. It happened the night the last candle in Blackthorn Hollow burned out. Elias had been rationing the final inch of tallow for 3 days. When the flame finally drowned in its own grease, the cottage plunged into a darkness thicker than tar. In that perfect black, the knocking came from inside the walls. Tap, 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 tap. Not at the door. Inside the chimney breast, inside the bread oven, inside the very floorboards beneath Meg's bare feet. Martha felt cold fingers brush her cheeks, mauled fingers. Familiar. Joseph screamed as something climbed onto his back and clung there like a second shadow. Elias swung the poker at nothing and struck only air. Yet the poker came away wet with grave mud. At dawn they were still themselves. Mostly they rose, milked the cows, boiled the porridge. But when they spoke, other voices sometimes finished their sentences. When Meg laughed, the laugh ended in a cough that had killed Samuel years ago. When Elias looked in the cracked mirror above the wash basin, his reflection blinked a half-second too late. They still lived as people lived in 1808, fetching water, mending looms, burying what little the frost had spared. But now every hearth held 2 fires, one of wood and one of memory. Every child carried an extra soul. Every night, when the last rushlet died, the dead spoke freely through living mouths, recounting every hardship they had ever endured, every grief, every terror of every century that had come before. The people of Blackthorn Hollow never left. Why would they? The dead had nowhere else to go. and the living had nowhere safer. And so they endured, as English villagers always had, in the cold, in the dark, in the company of all the centuries that refused to stay buried. If you listen on the winter night in Blackthorn Hollow even, now you can still hear the soft, patient knocking from inside the walls. 3 raps, then a child's voice. Polite as Sunday best. Please, the fire's gone out. May we come in?